Hi, it's Katrina. My friend David is actually going to be helping me out today, so we can give you a little bit more variety. Everyone say hi!
Number 10. The post-apocalyptic ships of the Aral Sea. The Aral Sea was once the fourth largest lake in the world, but over the last few decades, a significant lack of rainfall has led to a major decrease in the amount of water within the lake. It has essentially vanished, leaving a post-apocalyptic landscape of abandoned ships. The drying up of the lake began in the 1960s when the Soviet Union diverted two rivers that previously flowed into the lake as part of irrigation projects to increase crop yield. Slowly but surely, the lake was polluted by chemicals used for growing those crops, and then the water itself began to vanish. Before that, however, the water became highly poisonous, killing all of the wildlife. The dry wasteland where the Aral Sea once was is now filled with abandoned cargo vessels and derelict wrecks. The sight is remarkably eerie. Ships abandoned in dry valleys that were once teeming with fish. The visual seems almost like a scene out of a dystopian future film. These ships once belonged to the hundreds of fishermen who made their livelihoods on the shores of the lake. Now the abandoned vessels are mostly used by local children for playing hide and seek. Searches for Noah's Ark have been an obsession of many since the earliest days of post-biblical history. In fact, there is such a focus on finding relics and evidence of either the Great Flood or discoveries that are associated with the famed ship itself that there's even a playful name for it: archaeology. The many abandoned ships of the Aral Sea leave some to wonder. Could the legendary biblical ship that carried all of the Earth's creatures at one point be found here? Number 9. An abandoned coin stash. A mysterious abandoned coin stash was discovered at a dig in Port Arthur, Tasmania. Experts in archaeology say the discovery has given them rare insight into the lives of the convicts who once lived here. For those who don't know, Port Arthur was once a penal colony where prisoners were sent to live out the rest of their days. The prisoners here were not allowed to have money with them. This fact alone has made the discovery of the stash quite a mystery. The pile of coins consists of enough silver shillings to make up a whole week of salary for one of the overseers of the penal colony. And yet archaeologists say it was discovered beneath the workshop used by the convicts. In other words, it's incredibly out of place. The stash was found during an archaeological dig that went on for about 10 months, conducted by students with the University of New England. They found some other pretty interesting objects in the ruins of the old penal colony as well, such as handmade gambling tokens and tobacco pipes. All these objects had been abandoned by the convicts, who used them hundreds of years ago. Dr. Tuffin, one of the main researchers involved in the dig, believes the coins may have been stolen from an officer at the penal colony by one of the inmates and then hidden away for safekeeping. Someone had access to the workshop and was able to stash the coins beneath the floor, but what happened after is anybody's guess. The convict clearly was never able to go back and reclaim the coins, so they remained there undiscovered since sometime in the 1850s. Number 8. Submerged American tank. A submerged American tank abandoned in the Philippines was recently pulled out of a river. It was stuck in the mud for roughly 75 years, lost from between roughly 1944 and 2020. The tank itself is a Stuart M5A1 light tank that took part in the liberation of the Philippine Islands between 1944 and 1945. The liberation was led by United States soldiers who over the course of several months fought desperately to expel the Japanese and free the Filipinos from occupation. The tank was discovered and removed by engineers with the Philippine Armed Forces in the province of Medellin on the tip of the island of Cebu. Back in March of 1945, local guerrillas and U.S. infantry regiments were fighting towards the island of Leyte. When they first landed on Cebu, the troops were faced with an area that had been extremely treacherous, riddled with landmines. They did manage to liberate the main city on the island, but Japanese troops remained entrenched in the more remote parts. The Americans hunted them down mercilessly until they finally surrendered in August of 1945. As for what happened to the Stuart light tank, it was probably engaged in some of the later battles and was destroyed by a Japanese mortar round while trying to cross a river. It was ultimately abandoned by the soldiers, and the mud of the river absorbed it. The tank remained undiscovered until the 1980s, but wasn't removed from the river until fairly recently. Why do you think the tank was left in the river for roughly 3 decades after its discovery? Tell me your theories in the comments. Number 7. Abandoned Texas Fort. In Texas, there is an entire abandoned fortress that was constructed in 1898 and then used in World War I. It's called Fort Travis, and it's located on the Bolivar Peninsula. Although the fort has been decommissioned for decades, it has remained immaculately preserved and is open to the public. It's hard to believe looking at it now, but this was once one of the most technologically advanced fortresses anywhere in Texas. After a hurricane struck Galveston in 1900, a 17-foot, 5.18 meters seawall was added for extra protection against the elements. And after World War I, Fort Travis was enhanced and outfitted with a wide variety of weapons, including 4 batteries. These batteries had absolutely massive guns, from big 12-inch, 30-centimeter cannons to smaller, rapid-fire 3-inch, 7.6-centimeter guns. During World War II, German prisoners were held inside the fort, but when the war came to an end, so too did the life of Fort Travis. It was sold off to a private company, and it has since changed hands multiple times. It's now an eerie and abandoned fort that tourists occasionally stop by to check out. But in all its years of being sold from one company to another, the old batteries have never been removed. You can still see the defensive strongholds installed back in the 1940s. Number 6. Creepy hospital equipment. Inside an abandoned Scottish hospital, an urban explorer discovered some incredibly creepy objects left behind by the previous occupants. For a little bit of background on the hospital, called the Stobhill Hospital, and it opened in the city of Glasgow in 1904. It survived for over a century before it was eventually moved to a newer, more modern building in 2009. The hospital had almost 2,000 beds, with 200 of them being reserved for psychiatric patients, or a ward for people who suffered from mental health problems. During World War I, it was converted into a military hospital. After that, it expanded to become more modern, with the radiology department and maternity unit being built. But these days, the hospital is derelict and disturbing. The urban explorer documented his trip in 2019. He discovered ceiling tiles hanging from the roof, gaping holes in the rooms, and broken pieces of wood everywhere. Doors were removed from their hinges, scrap metal had been ripped out of the walls, and the only light came from smashed windows and holes in the ceiling. But perhaps the creepiest things were the abandoned objects found within. Old newspapers, empty glass bottles, and hospital beds covered in dirt and debris. The explorer even found old pictures in the reception area that may have belonged to the nurses who once worked there. Would you be willing to explore an abandoned hospital and walk through its corridors, knowing what kind of unnerving things you might find inside? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe before the end of the video. Number 5. Baby in a subway. In August of 2000, Danny Stewart phoned his partner just as Pete Mercurio was walking out his front door to meet for a date. Danny informed Pete that he would be late for their date because he had just discovered an abandoned baby in the subway and had called the police from a payphone for help. Obviously, an abandoned baby is not an object like others in this video, but this story is so fascinating and inspiring that it just simply has to be told. Stuart, who just so happens to be a social worker, spotted the small bundle of joy wrapped in a sweatshirt as he walked through the empty station. At first glance, he thought it was a doll or perhaps a toy left behind by someone's child before they got on the last train. But then he saw the leg move. Upon closer inspection, he discovered a recently born baby with its umbilical cord still attached. When the authorities arrived, they told Stuart the baby he'd found was only hours old. The baby boy was taken to the nearest hospital. He turned out to be perfectly healthy, and 3 months later, the adoption process started. Stuart and his partner ended up adopting the abandoned baby, naming him Kevin and making him their son officially in December of 2002. A heartwarming ending to what otherwise could have been a tragic story. What would you do if you discovered an abandoned child or infant in similar circumstances? Number 4. Car on the tracks. In Montana, a man got in some serious trouble for abandoning his car on railroad tracks. He literally parked his car on the tracks, got out, and left the vehicle there. And what do you imagine happened? It was hit by a train. According to the Phillips County Sheriff's Office, the train approached the vehicle at about 1:30 in the morning. Luckily, the train engineer was paying attention and was able to hit the brakes. But considering how fast the train was going, it still smashed into the abandoned car and pushed it over 600 yards, 548 meters down the tracks. Fortunately, no one was inside the vehicle when it happened, and nobody was hurt, but it could have been much worse. Now for the big question. Why did a man abandon his car in the worst possible place? He could have easily pulled over on the side of the street, but instead he left his vehicle on the railroad tracks. The police believe he was driving under the influence of alcohol when he abandoned his vehicle. So the reasoning behind the act remains a mystery. The man has since been arrested on charges of creating a hazard, criminal endangerment, disorderly conduct, and even criminal trespass to property. If you're going to abandon your car, don't do it on the railroad tracks. Number 3. An abandoned UFO. There appears to be a mysterious abandoned UFO on one of the most remote islands on this planet. The suspected UFO crash site was found thanks to internet sleuths going over images on Google Earth. The bizarre object was found on a place called Starbuck Island, located in the middle of nowhere in the Pacific Ocean. Of course, we don't actually have any proof that this is an alien spaceship, but it is an unidentified object. It appears to be on the western side of the island, and according to some, looks something like a huge silver disc that crashed into the sand from outer space. Plus, there's a skid mark clearly seen dug through the sand right before the object, suggesting it came to a grinding halt after crashing. The object appears to be between 40 and 50 feet, 12 to 15 meters long, and is thousands of miles away from the nearest human activity. Could this be a real crashed ship? Maybe. The biggest issue is that it was only discovered through Google Earth, and no one has been on site to verify that the object is there, or searched for any ocean wreckage. There's just no way to know for sure. Number 2. The President's Heads of Virginia. In Virginia, there are 43 abandoned statues of presidential heads. These statues stand about 20 feet, 6 meters tall. They're sitting in a field in the town of Croker, and they depict everyone from George Washington to George W. Bush. The presidential busts were once part of the President's Park in colonial Williamsburg, but when poor attendance caused the theme park to close down, a man named Howard Hankins was hired to destroy the statues. Spoiler alert, he couldn't do it. When Howard stared into the eyes of 43 US presidents, he just didn't have the heart to smash them to pieces. Instead, he brought every single one of them to his property, where he stuck them in a field, and there they remained. Since the heads have been abandoned on his property, only one has gone missing. Somebody snuck into the field and stole the bust of Barack Obama. Howard has reached out to the press in an attempt to have Obama returned to him, but so far, no luck. How anyone managed to sneak off with a huge bust undetected is yet another mystery. And even though the statues are bizarre and no longer part of a theme park, they still receive quite a lot of visitors. They've become a popular roadside attraction, with George Washington and Abraham Lincoln being the most popular. Howard even offers nightly tours of the abandoned presidents, in case you like your national representative spooky in the moonlight. Number 1. A sunken strip club. Off the coast of Israel, there is an abandoned strip club under the water. Yes, a subaquatic exotic dance club. How in the world is this possible? According to Gil Koplovitz, the marine biologist who recently found himself exploring the bizarre ruins of this place, it was once an underwater restaurant. Of course, it helps to know that the entrance is above ground, connected to the land by a 230-foot, 70 meters bridge. Patrons of the restaurant crossed the bridge, went down a flight of stairs, and found themselves in a submerged restaurant. But when the restaurant shut down, it turned into a strip club. It was one of the fanciest and most unique strip clubs in the world, until it too closed down and was abandoned by its owners. The club remains submerged, and now only underwater creatures frequent the place. What's the most interesting or bizarre abandoned object you've ever heard of? Let me know in the comments, and thanks a lot for watching. Remember to hit that subscribe button and come back soon to check out more amazing videos from the channel. Bye.